He gave away his labor for free, on purpose, and turned that decision into one of the most watched lawn care channels on the internet. His name is Martin Hernandez, and for years he was the quiet engine behind M&D Lawn Care, a father and son YouTube channel out of Houston, Texas that built a following of nearly 500,000 subscribers by transforming some of the worst neglected yards you've ever seen, without charging the people who needed it most. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what Martin's role was, how it changed, what the channel became because of that shift, and why the real story here is more interesting than anything the rumors suggest. Martin Hernandez was never chasing fame. That point matters, because it shapes everything that comes after it. Before M&D Lawn Care had a single subscriber, Martin was doing what a lot of working fathers in Houston do, running a small lawn care business, putting in the hours, trying to build something steady for his family. His son Daniel was with him on the job. That's how it had always been. Dad and son, mowers and trimmers, 1 yard at a time. They operated out of Channelview, Texas, a working-class community east of Houston, the kind of place where people know their neighbors and take pride in their properties even when money is tight. Channelview sits along the Houston Ship Channel, and the people who live there are largely tradespeople, factory workers, and small business owners. It's a community where the value of honest work isn't an abstract idea, it's how people measure each other. Martin understood that world from the inside. He wasn't an outsider documenting blue-collar life for an audience that had never seen it. He was living it. What made Martin the right person to build something like M&D Lawn Care wasn't credentials or business strategy. It was the combination of experience and patience, two things that don't come quickly. He knew how to read a neglected yard. He knew where to start when the weeds had taken over and the grass hadn't been touched in months. He knew which equipment handled what job and what a full transformation actually required versus what it looked like on the surface. That knowledge was built across years of physical work in Texas heat, and it showed in the footage before a single word of narration was added. What made M&D Lawn Care different from every other lawn care account on the internet wasn't the equipment. It wasn't a specific technique or a particularly dramatic editing style. It was the combination of two things that don't usually go together in business: skill and generosity. Martin brought the experience. Daniel brought the energy. And somewhere along the line, they pointed a camera at what they were already doing and let the work speak for itself. The channel launched around 2020. The name was simple: M for Martin, D for Daniel. No brand consultants. No strategy session. Just two people who cared about yards and cared about their community, letting the footage do the talking. For a long time, very few people were watching. But that was about to change, because of a moment that had nothing to do with YouTube and everything to do with who Martin Hernandez had raised his son to be. And if you think the origin of this channel is a standard small business success story, stay with me, because this next part is why the whole story matters. About 4 years before the channel blew up, Martin and Daniel finished a job at an elderly woman's home in Houston and went to collect payment. The woman told them she couldn't afford to pay. She wasn't being difficult. She explained that she was struggling to cover the cost of her medication. The bill for the lawn work was one thing she simply couldn't manage. Martin and Daniel looked at each other and made a decision on the spot. They told her to forget about it. No charge, no invoice. They left. That moment could have ended there, a quiet act of kindness that nobody ever knew about. But it didn't end there. It expanded. Daniel later recalled going home that evening and sitting with what had just happened. The thought that stayed with him was this: there are probably more people out there just like her, and we just don't know it. So they started going looking. Twice a week, on their own time, Martin and Daniel drove through Houston's neighborhoods, scouting for overgrown yards. Not yards owned by people who'd just gotten lazy. Yards owned by people who clearly couldn't keep up. The elderly, the disabled, single parents working multiple jobs, people living on fixed incomes with no buffer left for something like lawn care. They were looking for the yards that told a story before anyone opened the door. They knocked on doors. They offered to work for free. And at first, people didn't believe them. In a world where nothing is free, the offer felt suspicious. People assumed there was a catch, a sales pitch waiting at the end of the job, a service they'd be locked into, something. But then the mowers started, and the weeds came down, and the bags filled up with debris. And when it was over, homeowners stood on their porches, looking at yards they hadn't seen clearly in months, sometimes years. That's when something shifted. One of those homeowners was Kimberly Ray, 56, a disabled resident living on a fixed monthly income. When M&D spotted her yard during one of their scouting drives and knocked on her door, she had no idea what was coming. They worked the full job: mowed, trimmed, cleaned up, bagged all the debris. When it was done, she said she had her front yard back and no longer had to feel ashamed of it. She was clear about what was actually at stake. Without their help, she risked having a city lien placed on her house. One visit from Martin and Daniel changed the trajectory of her year. She called them angels. She said they restored her faith. That wasn't content strategy. That was just Martin and Daniel being who they were. And the camera, when it eventually captured moments like that, didn't manufacture the emotion. It just recorded it. Here's the part that changes everything about what you just heard. Daniel started recording the work, not for any particular reason at first, just to document what they were doing. The before and after format practically wrote itself. You arrive at a yard that's been swallowed by weeds, waist-high grass, debris that's been building for seasons. You spend a full day on it, and then you reveal what it looks like when it's done. That rhythm, the anticipation, the labor, the reveal, turned out to be exactly what YouTube's algorithm rewards. Viewers who found the channel didn't just watch one video. They stayed, they subscribed, they shared it, they came back. And some part of what made the format work so well was the contrast. Houston's climate is unforgiving. The heat alone turns lawn care into a demanding physical job for professionals with proper equipment. For neglected yards in midsummer, it's something else entirely. The camera captured that reality without softening it. Sweat, manual clearing before the mowers could even start, hauling out trash and debris that previous occupants or weather had left behind. Viewers weren't watching a quick transformation. They were watching real labor. What Martin understood instinctively, even before the numbers started moving, was that the work itself had to be real. This wasn't manufactured drama or staged reactions. The homeowners were genuinely surprised. The yards were genuinely neglected. The effort was genuine. You can't fake the sweat coming through a shirt at noon in a Houston summer. You can't fake the expression on an elderly man's face when he sees his front yard for the first time in a year. Audiences have a reliable instinct for the difference, even when they can't articulate it. M&D Lawn Care passed that test every single time. Martin's role in the early videos was what it had always been in real life, the experienced hand, the one who knew where to start when a yard was overgrown past the point of obvious entry, the one who could look at a property in decline and see the order underneath it. Daniel operated the camera and led the on-screen narration. Martin did the work that made the videos worth watching. The channel grew steadily, then it grew fast. By the time media coverage began, M&D Lawn Care had accumulated nearly 500,000 subscribers and over 139 million total views. ABC News affiliates across the country picked up the story. People magazine ran a feature on the father and son team. A Houston lawn care operation that started as a quiet act of charity for one woman who couldn't afford her medication had become a nationally recognized story about community, generosity, and what it means to work with your hands and your heart at the same time. Most people who know this story stop here, but the real story starts right now. When a channel grows fast, the audience develops opinions, and M&D Lawn Care's audience became deeply invested, not just in the transformations, but in the people doing them. Viewers began paying attention to who was in front of the camera and who wasn't. Daniel's presence as the face of the channel became more pronounced over time. His narration, his energy, his personality carried the videos forward. Martin was there, visible in the work, part of every job, but the dynamic between the two had naturally evolved as the channel grew. That evolution is completely normal for any creator-led project. When a channel scales from a few thousand subscribers to hundreds of thousands, the production approach has to change. More planning goes into each video. Someone has to think about the next upload, the next yard, the logistics of managing community requests. Someone has to be available when media calls. Someone has to make sure the equipment runs and the operation stays organized. The behind-the-scenes work of running a 500,000 subscriber YouTube channel is a second job, on top of the physical labor of running a lawn care operation. What happened with Martin wasn't a departure. It was a redistribution of roles that made sense for where the channel was going. Think about what actually happens when a small family business scales up fast. In the beginning, everyone does everything. There's no division of labor because there isn't enough labor to divide. Every pair of hands is needed on the same tasks at the same time. But when the operation grows, specialization becomes necessary. Someone leads the client work. Someone handles the logistics. Someone manages the communication. The structure that works at 10 customers a week doesn't work at 100. M&D Lawn Care went through that same process, but in public. Martin's experience, his knowledge of the work, his presence in the community, none of that changed. What changed was who was holding the camera and who was narrating the story. As Daniel grew more confident on screen, Martin became more of the operational backbone, the man who makes the work possible, even when the camera isn't on him. Viewers noticed the shift. Comments accumulated. The questions started. Where is Martin? Is Martin okay? What happened to Martin? Here's what the comments kept asking, and here's the answer they never got, until now. The concern the M&D audience has for Martin says something important about what the channel actually built. Most YouTube channels that reach this size develop a parasocial audience, people who feel connected to the creators they watch, who track changes in the videos and read into them, who feel the absence of a familiar face as something worth explaining. For most channels, that connection is built on entertainment. For M&D Lawn Care, it was built on something rarer, watching two real people do genuinely good work for people who needed it. The audience wasn't watching for drama or comedy or information. They were watching because the channel reminded them that people like Martin and Daniel exist, that you can run a business and still give away your labor to the people who can't pay for it, that a father and a son can work side by side through the Houston heat and actually like each other. That's rare content, and people recognized it. When viewers asked where Martin was, they weren't just curious about channel dynamics. They cared about him specifically, the quiet father, with the decades of experience and the steady hands. The man who, by every account, was the reason his son had the values that built the channel in the first place. When Daniel said, watching the woman who couldn't pay, that there are probably more people out there like her, that instinct didn't come from nowhere. It was learned. And Martin was the teacher. The answer to that question isn't a scandal. It isn't a falling out or a health crisis or a dramatic exit. What the audience was watching, without quite having the language for it, was a father who had done what fathers are supposed to do, raised a son capable of carrying something forward, and then stepped back to let him do it. That's a different kind of story than what the algorithm rewards. It doesn't have a twist. There's no reveal waiting at the end of it. It's just a man who poured everything he had into the work and into his kid, and then watched that investment pay off in a way neither of them could have planned. Daniel, who was still a teenager when the free lawn care work began, grew up on camera. The confidence visible in recent M&D videos is built on a foundation that Martin laid, not in a studio or a classroom, but in the Houston heat, yard after yard, for free, long before anyone was watching. And that's when the decision was made, the one nobody around them saw coming. Not every yard transformation went smoothly. In October 2024, M&D Lawn Care posted a community update that stopped their audience cold. The story was this: Martin, Daniel, and the crew had spent 3 full days transforming what they believed was a badly neglected yard. It was the kind of job that goes beyond a standard cleanup. 3 days of physical labor in that kind of work is significant. And when it was over, they found out that the person who had brought them in wasn't actually the property owner. He had used M&D Lawn Care's free service to make $500, essentially leveraging their goodwill to profit off a property he had no right to manage. They had never encountered anything like it before. The channel had spent years extending trust to strangers, knocking on doors and offering something for nothing. That model works because most people are honest about their situations. They don't pretend to be in need. They don't weaponize generosity. The post went up. The comments flooded in. What's telling about that moment isn't the scam itself. Bad actors exist in every system. What's telling is how Martin and Daniel responded. There was no announcement that they were scaling back. No video explaining that the free model was being discontinued. No pivot to paid content only. They shared what happened, let the audience process it, and kept going. That response is a direct reflection of what Martin built into the operation from the beginning. The mission wasn't contingent on every recipient being perfectly deserving. It was built on a broader belief that the community, on balance, needed what they were offering, and that a single bad actor didn't change that math. The audience saw it the same way. The support in the comments after that post was immediate. Viewers who had been following M&D for years weren't shaken. They were angry on the channel's behalf, and then they moved on with it. What happened next is the reason this story spread across the internet. By early 2026, something new was in motion. A February 2026 community post from M&D Lawn Care announced that the team had been working behind the scenes on something they described as really special, and that they had officially opened it. The post landed as a surprise to a lot of followers who had come to see M&D as a service and a channel, not a brand with a physical footprint. That kind of expansion is the next logical chapter for a channel that outgrew its original model. When you start as 2 people with mowers and a camera, and you build to nearly 500,000 subscribers and over 100 million views, the question eventually becomes, what do you do with that platform? How do you translate reach into something durable? M&D Lawn Care's answer has always been rooted in the community rather than in the content. The work was never about building a brand for its own sake. It was about the yards, the people behind them, and the ripple effect that a single act of generosity can produce. The channel demonstrated that ripple effect on screen, video after video, for years. The expansion in 2026 looks like an attempt to give that ripple a wider vessel. Martin was part of building what made that expansion possible, not just in the early years of physical labor, but in the values that shaped how the channel operated when the decisions got harder. When the scam happened and the easy move would have been to pull back, the channel held its course. When the audience's attention started focusing more on Daniel and less on Martin, the channel held its course. Consistency, in both the work and the mission, is what turns a viral moment into a lasting presence. The channel's audience reflected that back. Viewers haven't just subscribed, they've donated to causes the channel spotlights, shown up to volunteer in their own neighborhoods, and written in to share stories of how watching M&D Lawn Care changed the way they thought about generosity and service. A woman in a different state wrote in to say she'd started doing free yard work for her elderly neighbor after watching the channel. That's the kind of second-order effect that can't be manufactured by a content strategy. It grows from something real. And the something real was Martin, long before the camera was ever turned on. And if you think that was surprising, stay with me, because this next part is why the whole story matters. There is a version of this story that gets told a lot in YouTube commentary, the one where a creator steps back from their channel and audiences are left wondering what went wrong. The angle assumes something broke, a relationship, a business, a person. The M&D Lawn Care story doesn't fit that frame, and it's worth being direct about why. Martin Hernandez didn't leave. He didn't walk away from the mission or the operation. What happened is something far more ordinary and far more meaningful. The thing he built got big enough that it needed him in a different place. The work he did for 20+ years laid the foundation, and then the next generation stepped onto it. That's not a tragedy. That's a success, measured over time. What the audience sees when they wonder about Martin is a channel that grew past one person's individual presence. And that's not a loss, it's a measure of how well the whole thing was built. Daniel Hernandez didn't build an audience by being a charismatic kid who happened to have a camera. He built it by carrying something genuine forward. He started that work when he was a teenager, driving through Houston with his dad, looking for yards that needed attention and homeowners who needed someone to show up. The values that made that decision possible didn't appear out of thin air. Martin showed up first. Martin showed Daniel what showing up looked like. Martin built the foundation that an audience of nearly 500,000 people now stands on, even when most of them don't realize they're standing on it. The question of what really happened to Martin from M&D Lawn Care has a quieter answer than most people expect when they type it into a search bar. He didn't disappear. He didn't burn out. He didn't walk away from the mission that made the channel worth watching in the first place. He's still there, in the work ethic that runs through every video, in the operational backbone that keeps the channel running, in the son who grew up doing free lawn care in the Houston heat because his father showed him that was the right thing to do. That's not the kind of payoff that fits a dramatic thumbnail, but it's the kind that stays with you, the way the best things usually do. The story of Martin Hernandez is the story of a man who never needed anyone to watch him in order to do the right thing, and who, ironically, ended up with millions of people watching because of it. What started as a single waived invoice for a woman who couldn't afford her medication turned into nearly 500,000 subscribers, over 139 million views, national media coverage, and a channel expanding its presence into 2026. None of that happened through clever branding or viral stunts. It happened because two people kept showing up, to yards, to communities, to each other, and let the camera run while they did it. M&D Lawn Care continues to operate and to grow. Daniel leads the public-facing work. Martin remains the foundation it's all built on. And the audience keeps coming back because what they're watching is the real thing, which is, in the end, the only thing that lasts on YouTube or anywhere else. So here's the question worth sitting with. Martin built everything that made this channel possible, and then stepped back without an announcement, without drama, and without asking for credit. Do you think that kind of quiet contribution ever gets the recognition it deserves? Or does the spotlight always go to whoever's holding the camera? Let me know where you stand in the comments.